写 TH 好像是一位新网友啊，来自欧洲。谢谢这一些观众朋友们对于我们的支持。稍后华尔街联报继续为您带来过去24小时的最新报道评论和其他消息。观众朋友，大家好，欢迎收看今天的新风视线。贵州茅台旗下的53度飞天和5星茅台一夜之间平均涨价20%，这也意味着从11月1日起，茅台酒的主力产品53度500毫升装经典茅台酒的出厂价将由969元上调200元至1169元左右，但是市场指导价为1499元一瓶，暂时不变。贵州茅台股价周三上涨达到6%。10月20号，贵州茅台曾经披露3季度财报，2023年前3季度的营业收入达到1033亿元，同比增长18.5%，净利润则达到529亿元，同比增长19%。其中第3季度实现营业收入同比增长14%，净利润同比增长16%，创下了茅台业绩的历史新高。这也是贵州茅台至今第一次前3季度营收突破1000亿，整体业绩与2021年全年几乎持平，净利润已经超过2021年全年的525亿元。10月31日晚间，贵州茅台发布公告称，自2023年11月1日起，上调53度贵州茅台酒，也就是非洲茅台和5星茅台的出厂价格，平均上调幅度为20%，而此次调整不涉及市场指导价格。茅台历史上经历了多次提价，零售价更是从200多涨到2000多元。从这张涨价图上可以看到，下面灰色的是出厂价，上面深蓝色的是零售价。从2004年至今，涨幅惊人。期间曾经因为反腐打击、不得铺张浪费等口号而一度价格回落，但是近几年已经收复失地，再创新高。而公开资料显示，2018年贵州茅台的销售毛利率为91.1%，此后的2019年至2022年毛利逐年上涨，分别达到91.3%、91.4%、91.5%和91.9%。10月18号，贵州茅台副总经理兼财务总监蒋燕曾经说，消费者、投资者以及经销商、供应商都是茅台的利益共同体。他说，茅台股票改变了很多人的一生，并且称茅台是一个优质的酒企，靠的是几十年的沉淀，不是砸钱能砸出来的。而对于茅台的价格，贵州茅台的董事长丁雄军自2021年上台以来，无论是在业绩说明会还是在股东大会等公开场合，都对飞天茅台的涨价事宜讳莫如深。在茅台的股东大会上，丁雄军表示，对于飞天茅台什么时候提价、怎么提价要有智慧。他还说，如果飞天茅台能够提价，会有更多的利润。而时隔6年后，飞天茅台终于迎来了丁雄军所谓有智慧的提价举措，令它的股价也大涨6%。如今提价措施落地，由于茅台经销商是按月打款，在今年的第4季度，利润就会在茅台的财报上有所体现。而值得注意的是，此次涨价涨的是出厂价，市场指导价格保持不变。这也就意味着飞天茅台涨价抢的是渠道的利润。由于提价不涉及市场指导价格，经销商的利润空间大概率会面临挤压。回顾茅台提价前的一系列变革举措，不难发现此次飞天提价是丁雄军布下阳谋的必然结果。分析师表示，疫情之后白酒消费场景的恢复不及预期，就连茅台也会感到压力，选择直接对飞天系列提价是压力集中释放的结果。今年10月19号，市场曾经传出茅台将在4季度控量减费的消息，令惶恐的二级市场赶忙给茅台砸出了一根跌幅5.67%的阴线。而第二天，茅台3季度财报也显示，其3季度营收、净利增速均有所放缓，低于年初制定的15%的增长目标。从飞天茅台的批发价来看，今年中秋、国庆双节期间，飞天茅台的批发价明显承压，双节前后合计下跌150元左右，显然也面临市场需求不足的困境。茅台相关人士在与投资者的交流中解释称，在这样的宏观经济背景下，有3%至5%的价格波动也是很正常的。但是与此同时，茅台相关人士也表示，不排除对茅台酒直接提价的可能。 而不到1周之后，贵州茅台就在深夜官宣对飞天茅台进行提价，并且立即生效。这就是对飞天茅台的渠道利润进行了一次再分配。目前飞天批发价在2650元左右，提价后与出厂价之间仍然有近1500元的差价，这就是茅台经销商的利润空间。而在提价之前，我们可以看到一系列丁雄军布下的阳谋。首先，在提价的靴子落地之前，被丁雄军大力扶植起来的直销渠道成为了利器。今年前3季度，贵州茅台的直销占比达到 44.13%。丁雄军推出了 Ai 茅台电商 APP， 消费者在这一手机 App 中直接可以购买到官方正品茅台酒。该 App 超过4200万的用户数字，也就意味着茅台有能力绕过经销渠道直达消费者。浙商证券的研究报告预计，2023年贵州茅台全年的直销比例将超过 50%， 而在2021年丁雄军上任之前，贵州茅台的直销占比仅在 10% 左右。丁雄军的另一个阳谋，则是在保证飞天供应的前提下，加大力度投放非标产品的占比增收，试探经销商。所谓的非标产品，简单来说就是指飞天茅台之外的其他高端茅台酒，比如说生肖系列、礼宾系列、陈酿系列以及节气系列等等所有的高端产品。2022年非标茅台收入占比已经超过飞天，成为茅台酒收入的主要组成部分。业内人士表示，今年下半年以来，茅台一直在控制飞天茅台的量，茅台现在库存的全部都是非标茅台酒。华创证券的研报认为，今年第3季度茅台酒营收同比增长 14.6%， 仍然由非标产品贡献这一部分的增量。而如今结果显示，直接提价才是贵州茅台的最终底牌。白酒行业分析师表示，茅台经销商按月打款节奏不变，因此11月1号提价的影响将直接反映在今年4季度的业绩上。据方正证券分析师王泽华的测算，此次茅台酒出厂价的提高，预计将会令茅台今年收入增加约62亿元，增厚幅度约 4.2%， 增加净利润约41亿元，增厚幅度约 5.6%。那么从长远来看，提价措施会带来什么样的后续结果呢？历史上，贵州茅台对飞天茅台共有过8次提价，但是并非每次提价都会对飞天的批发价带来正向的价格传导。数据显示，贵州茅台此次对飞天 20% 的涨幅，仅低于2008年的 22% 和2012年的 32%。而在2012年那次提价之后，恰逢白酒行业因为限制3公消费而遇冷，茅台批发价有所下滑。当时的时任董事长袁仁国甚至对经销商下过死命令，说必须力挺茅台价格，谁低就取缔谁，最终是稳住了茅台的价格。而在距今6年前的2018年，飞天茅台最近的一次提价也是在袁仁国任上实现的。飞天茅台价格从819元提高至969元，涨幅达到 18%。但相比2018年，如今贵州茅台所处的外部环境更像是2012年，白酒消费需求的收缩显而易见。2018年茅台涨价的背景是消费升级带动飞天茅台批发价从1100元左右攀升至1600元，市场上的平价茅台一瓶难求。而相比之下，如今飞天茅台的批发价自2021年曾经短暂站上过3000元大关后，已经许久未涨，甚至出现双节前后价格大幅下滑的情况。这就意味着上一轮飞天茅台批发价上涨之后，厂商与经销商共赢的场景都没有再次出现。这无疑是一场存量的博弈，是茅台对渠道利润的部分收回。终端茅台的消费需求也并未如预期般的火热。湖北地区的终端经销商表示，在11月1号涨价的第1天，茅台的市场价格并未上涨，但他预计临近元旦前后价格会有所上涨。另外一方面，白酒行业的周期其实与房地产、基建等行业也是息息相关。川财证券的分析师在研报中指出，在2009年3月4万亿政策落地，地产、基建等行业扩张带动政界、商界的商务活动增加之后，这一点成为了酒企当时业绩回暖的重要原因。而现在酒企几乎失去了房地产行业，中国消费者的消费能否再次升级也成为一个未知数。而目前来看，即使贵为茅台，也没有逃离周期的例外。 在成为中国股王之后，贵州茅台在过去10年中成为世界上最有价值的酒类生产商，并且一直被视为中国消费市场的代表。它的市值超过20亿元人民币，是中国市值第2高的公司，仅次于腾讯。多年来也一直是外资在中国投资的核心组成部分。而现在，外国投资分析师表示，与2年前相比，外资对茅台的持股量大幅下降。茅台本轮抬价所带来的利好，也许只能够影响到 A 股。而对于外国投资者来说，这不会成为他们买入的驱动力，因为中国现在整体经济的负面形势影响太大。中国本周的经济数据显示，官方的综合采购经理人指数和财新制造业指数纷纷下跌，扭转了中国经济开始复苏的迹象，令人再次为中国经济的萎缩开始担忧。以上就是今天新风视线的全部内容，感谢您的收看。这里是华尔街电视，如果喜欢，记得点赞并且订阅我们的频道。我们下期节目再见。
在第一段视频中，我们讨论了早期的犹太复国主义运动如何受到了在俄罗斯帝国1881年至1906年期间发生的暴动及反犹骚乱的推动。亚历山大3世沙皇曾赦免了许多这些骚乱的策划者，同时支持了协助东欧犹太人逃离暴力，在奥斯曼巴勒斯坦重新安置的犹太慈善机构。亚瑟·巴尔夫勋爵支持了1905年的外国人法案，限制了犹太寻求庇护者在英国重新定居的数量。尽管他在1917年发布了巴尔夫宣言，承诺在一战结束后为犹太人民在奥斯曼巴勒斯坦建立一个国家的权利。与此同时，英国承诺向协助击败奥斯曼帝国的叙利亚、伊拉克和巴勒斯坦的阿拉伯盟友赋予自决权。然而，在一战结束时，英国建立了巴勒斯坦和伊拉克的托管地，这激起了巴勒斯坦阿拉伯人的不满。随着英国托管继续对巴勒斯坦农民征税，尽管谷物价格暴跌，不满情绪升级为大规模起义。1936年的大巴勒斯坦起义在1939年被英国托管部队和犹太武装分子的协助下镇压。随着反犹主义在意大利和德国助长法西斯主义的烈焰，以及纳粹战争机器占领波兰、比利时和法国，耶路撒冷大穆夫提阿敏·侯赛因曾获得英国支持，于1941年11月访问了柏林的阿道夫·希特勒，寻求结盟，以结束英国对巴勒斯坦的托管，并驱逐巴勒斯坦的犹太移民。本雅明·内塔尼亚胡最近提到这次会晤说服希特勒发动犹太大屠杀。
This attack and other attacks on the Jewish community in 1920, 1921, 1929 were instigated by a call of the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was later sought for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials because he had a central role in fomenting the final solution. He flew to Berlin. Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. You said, burn them.
这一说法已被证伪，因为侯赛因很可能是反犹主义者，但德国占领的波兰地区于1941年6月就开始了对犹太人的大规模屠杀，早于侯赛因与希特勒的会晤，暗示希特勒没有打算大规模屠杀犹太人是一种大屠杀修正主义。最初，希特勒效仿其他反犹主义的欧洲领导人的例子，积极支持排犹事件和对犹太人的袭击，同时还参与了与巴勒斯坦犹太当局的哈瓦拉协议，允许德国犹太人在清空他们在德国的财产后，在巴勒斯坦重新安置。根据该协议， 超过6万名来自德国和德国占领地的犹太人移民到了巴勒斯坦。将希特勒政府称为犹太复国主义者是一种反犹主义。然而，纳粹政权将犹太复国主义运动视为其迫害犹太人和创立雅利安族主义国家的临时有用工具。同盟国国家也对逃离纳粹迫害的犹太难民表示不欢迎。美国政府拒绝了多批犹太庇护寻求者，其中许多人最终在大屠杀中丧生。这种不愿提供庇护的主要原因之一是对犹太难民可能是德国间谍的疑虑。相似的言论也被用于2011年的叙利亚难民。保守派表示他们可能是 ISIS 激进分子。
ISIS is already trying to use the U.S. refugee program to smuggle terrorists into the U.S., so says the head of the House Homeland Security Committee.
以及来自南美的庇护寻求者，被称为潜在的人口贩子和毒品走私者。
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
尽管到1939年，英国已接纳了来自欧洲的7万多名犹太难民，但英国的移民程序积极阻止移民进入和留在英国。据估计，有50万名犹太难民被拒绝入境。美国拒绝了多艘犹太难民的船只，包括载有近乎全部为犹太人的937名乘客的客轮圣路易斯。这艘客轮被迫返回欧洲，最终超过1/4的乘客在大屠杀中丧生。在战争期间，巴勒斯坦阿拉伯人和移民到巴勒斯坦的犹太人参加了巴勒斯坦团的战斗，反对轴心国。但随着战争接近尾声，1944年，伊尔贡等犹太武装分子由梅纳赫姆·贝京领导，恢复了对英国托管的叛乱，反对建立以阿拉伯人为主体的国家和限制犹太移民到巴勒斯坦的计划。伊尔贡和勒西被英国托管部队和巴勒斯坦犹太当局标记为恐怖组织。他们的叛乱活动包括对英国警察局的爆炸袭击和对英国官员的刺杀。尽管统治巴勒斯坦的犹太机构的军事义哈加纳表面上应该协助英国打击叛乱，但到1945年，哈加纳秘密与勒西和伊尔贡力量合作进行行动。叛乱活动在1946年伊尔贡对位于耶路撒冷大卫王酒店的英国巴勒斯坦托管地行政总部进行爆炸袭击后愈演愈烈。到1947年3月1日，为回应伊尔贡对英国目标的袭击，包括耶路撒冷的军官俱乐部。
New savagery flares up in Palestine as terror gangs strike again, this time at the Goldsmith Officers Club in Jerusalem.
英国当局对巴勒斯坦犹太区实施了戒严，以集体惩罚的方式回应伊尔贡对英国目标的爆炸袭击。到1947年9月，巴勒斯坦的英国内阁已经受够了，决定撤离非必要人员。他们原本计划建立一个单一国家的计划似乎不可能实现，而之前被认为不切实际的以色列分割为2个独立国家的提议似乎是实现和平的唯一选择。到了1947年11月29日，联合国批准了将以色列分割为2个国家的计划。这对阿拉伯人来说是不可接受的，并引发了巴勒斯坦内战。到了1948年5月14日，以色列宣布独立并建立了他们的国家。第二天，英国宣布结束了他们的托管，并撤离了所有剩余的人员。随着战争加剧，来自阿拉伯世界各地的军队前来支援新建立的以色列国家的巴勒斯坦叛军。虽然他们在战争初期取得了成功，封锁了耶路撒冷的犹太社区，摧毁了以色列的坦克和装甲车辆，但随着以色列与苏联签署了武器合同， 并征召和训练了新建国家的每位犹太公民，战局逆转。像伊尔贡和勒西这样的犹太武装分子，以前主要针对英国目标，也参加了战争，对耶路撒冷西部的迪尔亚辛村进行了一次屠杀，杀死了114名阿拉伯人。
ושלקחתי על עצמי את העול הזה, והצלחתי לגרש את הבריטים, והצלחתי לנצח את הנאצים, והצלחתי לנצח את הערבים, ואני כבש, אני, בציון כהן, כבשתי את רוב דרומה של ירושלים. ב9 לאפריל נכבשה דיר יאסין. וכולם התחילו לברוח, מדוע הם צעקו דיר יאסין עלינה? הם ברחו מחיפה, ברחו מיפו, ברחו מכל... הכל בגלל דיר יאסין. דיר יאסין עלינה, הפחד של דיר יאסין. לו היו אז עוד 3-4 דיר יאסינים בארץ ישראל, לא נשאר אף ערבי אחד בארץ.
还有证据表明哈加纳后来成为以色列国防军 IDF 使用了生物战，用伤寒杆菌污染了阿拉伯城镇的井水。到1949年7月20日，以色列已与叙利亚、黎巴嫩、约旦和埃及签署了停战协议，有75万名巴勒斯坦人被赶出家园，流入邻国或新的巴勒斯坦边界。以色列保留了在1948年联合国分割计划边界之外获得的领土。曾领导犹太恐怖分子伊尔贡的梅纳赫姆，北京后来成为以色列总理，任职于1977年至1983年。1947年至1949年的阿拉伯以色列战争仍然存在争议。捍卫以色列的人坚持认为巴勒斯坦人的流离是自愿的，并嘲笑纳克巴，巴勒斯坦的阿拉伯名，指的是75万巴勒斯坦人的流离。巴勒斯坦人坚持认为流离是被迫和暴力的。加沙地带的81%人口要么是奈克巴的幸存者，要么是其后代。基督教犹太复国主义者继续支持犹太人返回以色列，其中许多人怀有反犹主义情绪。以色列左倾报纸哈雷兹在2018年的一篇文章中估计，基督教犹太复国主义者主要是福音派组织，从2008年到2018年之间捐赠了5000万至6500万美元。许多福音派基督徒相信，犹太人返回以色列将实现圣经预言，加速耶稣基督的再来。
Recognize this fact, that God's clock only moves when the Jewish people are in the land of Israel.
这是福音派对即将到来的末日的希望的一部分，那将消除所有非信徒，包括犹太人。
That Ezekiel 39:2, King James Version, everybody else waffles on that, says, I'm going to leave but a sixth part of you. That means 5 out of 6 are going to be killed. That's 84%.
许多福音派资金最终支持了被占领的西岸非法定居点，这些非法定居点是官方认可的巴勒斯坦领土。近年来一直受到由以色列国防军和国家支持的犹太定居者的占领。最近，以色列国家安全部长伊塔马尔·本吉尔被看到在视频中分发1万支步枪，供平民民兵使用，包括西岸的民兵。在极端情况下，白人至上主义者将以色列和犹太复国主义视为成功建立民族国家的尝试。白人民族主义领袖、新纳粹分子、白人民族主义者理查德·斯宾塞曾一度将自己的政治意识形态称为白人犹太复国主义。他在以色列第2频道的一次出现中说，
I mean, you could say that I am a white Zionist in the sense that I care about my people. I want us to have a secure homeland that's for us and ourselves, just like you want a secure homeland in Israel.
你可以说我是一个白人复国主义者， 因为我关心我的人民。我希望我们有一个安全的家园，就像你们希望在以色列有一个安全的家园一样。以色列为全世界的犹太人、他们的子孙和配偶提供公民身份和重新安置的政策，对于一个屡遭迫害和不断面对反犹主义的民族来说至关重要。但重要的是要注意，以色列是在犹太复国主义思想家悲观地认为犹太散居民将永远不会被允许和平生活的时代创建的。现在，任何犹太难民都可以在以色列寻求庇护，但那些不是犹太人却仍然被寻求庇护的国家拒之门外的数百万难民怎么办呢？现在有700万巴勒斯坦难民，他们要么出生在巴勒斯坦或以色列，要么是出生在巴勒斯坦的人的后代，但却不符合以色列公民身份的资格。
大家好，我是华尔街电视的小安，为大家主持一档新的节目《亚洲大眼睛》。什么样的内容，您慢慢看就知道了。孟加拉反政府集会和工人罢工活动暴力升级，导致2名工人死亡，还有数十人受伤。联合国人权事务高级专员也对暴力事件表示深切关注。孟加拉首都达卡街头有公共巴士在罢工和示威行动中被烧毁。组织示威的主要反对党民主主义党指控警方在2000名抗议者集会上杀死了2名民主主义党成员，还导致100多人受伤。警方则指控示威者在10月份的示威期间杀害了1名警察。一位当地民众就说，当时的气氛非常紧张，一些公共巴士都被烧毁了，出门都会感到担忧。在这同时，也有数千名的服装厂工人10月31日走上达卡和加济布尔工业区的街头，要求提高工资，之后与警方爆发冲突。一名愤怒的女工抱怨说，物价不断的上涨，工人的工资却不涨，维持温饱都成了问题。那孟加拉2大反对党的超过10万名支持者走上达卡街头，要求总理哈希纳下台，以在中立政府的领导下举行自由且公平的投票。主要反对党孟加拉民族主义党在其脸书专页上发布的影片就显示，震撼弹接二连三的爆炸，路上冒出滚滚黑烟，数千人惊慌奔逃。那其实早在上个月，暴力事件就在首都市中心的道路和小巷蔓延，警方发射催泪瓦斯和橡皮子弹，示威者则投掷石块和砖块反击。达卡市警察局发言人霍森告诉法新社，有1名警察被杀，100多人受伤，而这1名殉职的警员头部被示威人士砍伤。孟加拉民族主义党则说，该党的1名青年倡议人士在冲突中被警察击毙。根据报道，孟加拉民族主义党和该国最大伊斯兰政党伊斯兰党的抗议活动是今年迄今为止规模最大的一次，这显示他们的抗议活动进入了新的阶段，因为大选即将在3个月内登场。孟加拉建国者的女儿哈希纳已经执政15年，任内推动经济快速成长，人均国内生产总额 GDP 超过邻国印度，但通货膨胀率飙升，他的政府也被批评腐败和侵犯人权。尽管哈希纳的宿敌患病的孟加拉民族主义党领导人吉亚因腐败指控被定罪后，实际上处于遭软禁状态，但反对派近几个月来一直在举行抗议活动，并提出他们要的诉求。孟加拉官员就证实，在示威前几天，有数百名反对派人士遭到拘留。那为什么孟加拉那么穷？很多人对这个国家的基础印象似乎都停留在火车挂人、垃圾遍地。相比于中国四通八达的交通网络，孟加拉的交通实在是有些说不过去。在这里，趴火车已经成了一种常态，很多时候一列火车外面挂着的乘客比里面坐着的还要多，这不是夸张，也不是玩笑。根据统计，孟加拉每年的火车运载量有4000多万，但贫穷的孟加拉没有完善的交通设施支撑这么庞大的运载量，所以孟加拉人民只能兵行险招，把自己当成一个装饰品挂在火车身上。而如此做法最终也导致了另一个大问题的出现，那就是堵。在孟加拉首都达卡，不管你是火车还是私家车，平均行驶1公里就得花费半个小时。这就是真实的孟加拉国，一个把火车挂人变成日常的国家，一个垃圾遍布全国的国家，一个食不果腹的国家。 那即使在21世纪的今天，全世界都在向发达国家靠拢，可是孟加拉还在为温饱问题发愁。整个孟加拉国有 60% 的人口至今可能还过着吃了上顿没有下顿的生活，其中 35% 的人可能压根就没饭吃，就连联合国都对这个国家绝望了。联合国环境组织早已经宣布放弃孟加拉国。那么到底是什么原因导致孟加拉如此贫穷？它的问题到底出现在哪里？孟加拉国土总面积 14.7 万平方公里，对比中国和印度无疑是个小国，但就是这么点国土，里面却生活了超过 1.6 亿的人口，跟俄罗斯的人口总数旗鼓相当，想想就觉得拥挤。但庞大的人口基数并没有给孟加拉带来红利，其国家人均 GDP 仅为1750美元，这个数字就算放在非洲也是极为寒酸的。其实孟加拉国也有过一段极为辉煌的年代。14世纪的时候，孟加拉出现了一个孟加拉苏丹国。当时的孟加拉苏丹国是整个世界眼馋的富有国家，地处热带，水热水源条件都非常好。在那个时候，以农耕为主的时代，这样的条件等于就是老天赏饭吃。而且孟加拉 85% 的国土都是平原，还有肥沃的恒河三角洲辅助，农作物栽种下去后几乎不存在死亡的情况。那因为生活条件不断的提升，孟加拉的人口也随着迎来爆炸式的增长。到16世纪时，孟加拉已经发展成次大陆上人口最密集、经济最发达、文化昌盛的繁华地区。然而这样的好日子并没有持续多久，时间走到17世纪，孟加拉人民的苦难生活也拉开了序幕。首先进入孟加拉的外族人是蒙古人，蒙古人将孟加拉征服之后，蒙古突厥贵族对孟加拉实施了近100年的横征暴敛，但这一些远远不是孟加拉人民噩梦的尽头。比蒙古统治者更可怕的是西方殖民者。18世纪工业革命掀起了一股世界热潮，由此诞生了强大的殖民者，他们在世界各地扩张自己的殖民地。1757年，属东印度公司和英国殖民军盯上了孟加拉。当时英国已经完成了工业革命，军事力量空前强大，打南亚次大陆的这些土族不过就是放几炮的事。经过短暂的普拉西战役之后，孟加拉王公投降，南亚地区长达190年的英属统治就此开始了。孟加拉一度沦为英国的原材料产地和商品倾销市场，但唯一的好处就是英国人加速了南亚实现近代化的进程。他们给南亚带来了铁路、公路和火车，也带来了电灯、城市和金融中心。而这也在日后几百年内成了印度人口中英国人做的唯一一件好事。因为有了英国人带来的这些现代文明，才使得民族不同、语言不同的南亚大片土地实现了统一。那随后，英国人将穆斯林和印度教徒迁走，然后将孟加拉人送到印度，最后再把印度人迁居到巴基斯坦。一整套人口大转移操作后，整个南亚地区基本乱了套，而这也是后来南亚地区民族、宗教和领土纠纷的由来。1857年，印度爆发了史上规模最大的一次暴乱，甚至差点推翻了英国统治。那遗憾的是，这次的大起义并没有成功。英国的火炮很快就焚尽了印度人的怒火。事后，英国王室取缔了东印度公司，设立英属印度，并由英国政府直接管辖。但最无辜的还是孟加拉。这一战之后，孟加拉被纳入了英属印度的统治之下，不仅要受命于英国人，还要被印度人使唤。也就在这个时候，孟加拉人谋求了独立的念头，埋下了种子。二战时，印度因为帮助英国人抗击日军，且两国事先有约，战争胜利后就给印度以独立的身份。随着蒙巴顿方案的签订，被英国统治100多年的印度终于可以独立生活，且考虑到印度各民族以及宗教信仰的不同，英国宣布印巴分治，各自独立。由于孟加拉人基本是穆斯林，所以英国人根本不考虑孟加拉人自己的意愿，直接就把孟加拉划给了巴基斯坦，美其名曰东巴斯基坦，而西孟加拉则被印度纳入了自己的领土。而1970年，东巴人民联盟提出东巴自治纲领，决定联合所有孟加拉人谋求独立。 这个想法很快就被巴基斯坦中央政府给否决，领头的拉赫曼还被判处叛国罪，执行逮捕令。当时正处印度和巴基斯坦矛盾高发期，这个意外惊喜很快就被印度得知。为了打击巴基斯坦，印度直接单方面宣布孟加拉独立，并允许孟加拉人在加尔各答成立了临时的政府。巴基斯坦派军队进入东巴维稳，东巴不肯，双方只能刀兵相向。此时已是美苏冷战高峰期，印度背靠苏联，苏联得知此事后，立刻派军进入南亚地区支持印度和孟加拉的军事行动。而亲美的巴基斯坦由于大部分港口被印军提前封锁，无法得到美元，很快就招架不住投降了。1971年3月26日，联合国正式宣布孟加拉独立，次年成立孟加拉人民共和国。然而，独立之后，孟加拉人才发现自己又陷入了一个新的圈套。虽然印度人帮助孟加拉获得独立，但也从此把持着孟加拉的政治、经济。那孟加拉独立后的一举一动都要受印度政府的控制，这让孟加拉人很不爽。于是，1981年，陆军总司令艾哈迈德发动了军事政变，夺了总统拉赫曼的位置，孟加拉就此进入了军政府时代。艾哈迈德统治下的10年，也是孟加拉人一个多世纪以来幸福指数最高的10年。在任期内，艾哈迈德积极倡导与周边国家建立友好合作关系，大力发展孟加拉经济能力。到艾哈迈德卸任时，孟加拉的 GDP 比起刚独立时翻了4倍多。但眼看孟加拉人的日子过得越来越好，印度又有些不开心了。一直以来，印度都想在东南亚地区确立自己地区霸权的主导地位，所以不断地对周边几个国家出手，从此控制各国的政治以及经济。孟加拉自然也是印度要控制的国家之一。由于印度有106块飞地在孟加拉国，孟加拉国有92块飞地在印度，所以两国之间不可能完全脱离关系。这也使得孟加拉独立后的发展始终受到印度的牵制。可怜的是，像孟加拉这样的小国，基本没有可以与印度抗衡的资本。2008年金融危机之后，本来还过得下去的孟加拉人瞬间跌落谷底，经济急剧衰退，至今仍未恢复。而与经济形成鲜明对比的是，孟加拉的人口在几十年内一直呈现增长趋势，越穷越生，导致人口成了孟加拉国如今面临的最大困境。经济发展和基建建设的速度根本跟不上人口的增量，无业人口越来越多，最后形成了一个又一个的贫民窟。找不到活干的孟加拉年轻人，要么挤在贫民窟中荒废余生，要么走上一条犯罪的不归路。除此之外，由于孟加拉地处恒河下游，使得他们成了印度生活和工业垃圾最好的接收点。每年都有大量的印度垃圾从上游飘到下游，而孟加拉政府又无力治理，最终导致孟加拉如今脏乱差的局面。截至21世纪的今天，孟加拉人民的文盲率依旧高达 80%， 教育的缺失使得孟加拉男女不平等的问题异常严重，环境污染严重，社会建设缺失，遍地都是垃圾。从独立后到今天，孟加拉的日子似乎并没有因此变好，而这一切的背后都与印度脱不了关系。那很难想象，如果无法挣脱这层枷锁，孟加拉日后会何去何从？谢谢大家，这是本期的亚洲大眼睛，希望听到您的意见，留言在节目下方。
The discussion of rules for the use of artificial intelligence is a crowded space. The United Kingdom is hosting an AI safety summit later this week, the European Union moving forward with its AI Act to regulate AI, the United Nations is creating a digital compact, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and G7 have issued guidelines, and there are countless public and private sector conferences on managing the risks of AI. Stanford University found that 37 AI-related laws in 127 different countries passed in 2022 alone. Most of these guidelines say more or less the same thing, that all must balance the potential risk of AI systems against the risk of losing the economic and social benefits the new technology can bring. The United States is the latest entrant into the crowded field, with the Biden administration releasing its Executive Order, EO, on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. The United States leads in developing AI technologies, also a crowded space, so these rules are consequential, if not always groundbreaking. The EO is level-headed, it avoids the use of phrases like existential risk and focuses on concrete problems, security and safety, privacy, discrimination. Its approach to managing risk is increased transparency and the use of testing, tools, and standards. In recent months, many federal agencies have pressed ahead with AI-related rules. This EO establishes a requirement to engage in AI rulemaking that had lagged since President Trump's initial February 2019 order. Perhaps its defining feature is its use of the executive-led approach to regulation, in contrast with the legislative approaches in the European Union. Title 1. Key points from the executive order. The EO has a very broad scope. There is great emphasis on developing standards for critical infrastructure, and using AI tools to fix software reinforces goals set in the National Cybersecurity Strategy and recognizes the potential benefits of AI. One important new requirement is to apply standards for federally funded biological synthesis projects, an area that many experts see as the most likely near-term risk from AI. Limiting standards to federally funded projects also limits their scope, but in this and in other areas, the EO highlights the need for international cooperation in making the use of AI less risky. Harmonizing the many EO guidelines and laws with international partners might be one of the most important tasks the administration can take. Unless Congress dramatically changes from the regulatory principles in the EO, it all but assures the United States will decline to follow the European Union's risk classification embedded in the EU AI Act. The principles in the EO are not as incompatible with the EU AI Act as the competing privacy policies of the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation and the laissez-faire U.S. approach, and the language the EO uses on privacy, civil rights, and workers' rights is consistent with the European Union's approach. Another major element of the EO is its focus on red teaming. Red teaming entails stress testing programs for potential holes or safety oversights. Under the Defense Production Act, the EO states that companies developing any foundation model that poses a serious risk to national security, national economic security, or national public health and safety must notify the federal government when training the model, and must share the results of all red team safety tests. While this provision is likely to invite pushback from the private sector, which will claim that such measures will lead to the leakage of trade secrets, this policy will encourage private sector developers to consider more seriously the net effects of their products. Embedded in this section, however, is also the growing mission creep of the administration's economic security agenda that increasingly melds economic and trade policy together with national security objectives. In today's more decentralized, diffuse, and digital environment, that may prove prescient over time. Some of the proposed solutions are not new. The United States has tried to promote privacy-preserving technologies since the Obama administration with little success. Efforts to avoid AI-enabled fraud through detection, authentication, and watermarking are also not new and have had limited uptake by users. This might be a place where greater use of AI tools can help. Proponents of immigration reform are not shy in linking US-China technology competition to making more visas available for skilled foreign talent. There are many world-class AI researchers eager to join U.S. universities and AI labs, but the EO's plan to modernize the visa process, while a welcome improvement, is not a game-changer without increasing the cap for highly skilled applicants. The EO raises many social issues AI will create, such as the risk of discrimination and the effect on workers, but does not really address them. The sections on discrimination and on workers calls for studies and work to develop principles and best practices. Other sections, like the section on innovation, echoes some of the administration's pet themes like helping small businesses and encouraging the Federal Trade Commission. These ideas are not linked to any specific action. There are no easy solutions to some of the most enduring ills of the social media era, such as the link between content moderation, misinformation, and online harassment issues that reflect society rather than represent problems to be resolved through executive action. Most of the action in the EO will need to be developed further, making the EO a kind of work plan as much as a rule. Title 2, Congress and AI Regulation. Congress is the biggest obstacle to progress in making AI safer. EOs have the force of law, but they are limited to authorities Congress has already approved. While some executive agencies are confident that their existing authorities are adequate to regulate AI, in other cases, particularly for privacy, there is a limit to what an EO can achieve unless Congress passes legislation, and this is unlikely. Congress has abrogated its role in regulating privacy so far. Instead, California's Consumer Privacy Act has become the largest piece in a patchwork of state privacy policies. More broadly, the reliance on executive authorities to regulate AI denotes a major hurdle, since Congress has been unable to legislate on potential harms resulting from the adoption of advanced digital technologies. There have been hard lessons learned about the United States' inability to regulate social media, and U.S. lawmakers are keen to avoid a similar scenario as AI becomes increasingly prominent. The inability of Congress to agree on legislation has made the Biden administration rely on its executive powers. This action on AI, for example, follows an earlier EO from August 2023 that limited U.S. investment in AI with potential military and intelligence uses in China. Failure to legislate forces the administration to create strategic roadmaps for understaffed U.S. agencies to implement. Title III, Enforcement of the Executive Order. Another question for the EO is how it will be enforced. The EO builds on earlier voluntary commitments from private sector behemoths, but securing their buy-in to this agenda will be necessary in effectuating many of these changes. On the same day the EO was released, G7 leaders put out a statement announcing the creation of guiding principles for all AI actors in the AI ecosystem and code of conduct for organizations developing advanced AI systems. The G7 process aligns with the EO, calling for red teaming and authentication methods such as watermarking. The text of the EO factsheet affirms the goal to complement and support international efforts, including the G7 Hiroshima AI process. However, the Hiroshima AI process is more narrowly focused than the EO, primarily targeting advanced foundation models and generative AI. The G7 documents are also unique in that they are a living document intended to be updated as AI models evolve, an important facet given the rapid pace of AI's advancement. Parts of the private sector was largely quick to support the EO. Microsoft's President Brad Smith said the following on X: "Today's executive order is another critical step forward in the governance of AI technology. And we look forward to working with U.S. officials to fully realize the power and promise of this emerging technology." However, NetJoyce, a coalition of trade associations and technology firms, published a press release that largely condemns the EO as a red tape wishlist that would harm the AI marketplace, stifle innovation and investment, and ultimately damage the United States' standing as a tech leader. If the United States is to regulate AI, it will need to secure durable buy-in from both the private sector and international partners. This is no small feat to achieve, but the risks are high if it fails. Nothing in world politics is inevitable. The underlying elements of national power, such as demography, geography, and natural resources, matter, but history shows that these are not enough to determine which countries will shape the future. It is the strategic decisions countries make that matter most: how they organize themselves internally, what they invest in, whom they choose to align with and who wants to align with them, which wars they fight, which they deter, and which they avoid. When President Joe Biden took office, he recognized that U.S. foreign policy is at an inflection point, where the decisions Americans make now will have an outsized impact on the future. The United States' underlying strengths are vast, both in absolute terms and relative to other countries. The United States has a growing population, abundant resources, and an open society that attracts talent and investment and spurs innovation and reinvention. Americans should be optimistic about the future. But U.S. foreign policy was developed in an era that is fast becoming a memory, and the question now is whether the country can adjust to the main challenge it faces: competition in an age of interdependence. The post-Cold War era was a period of great change, but the common thread throughout the 1990s and the years after September 11th was the absence of intense great power competition. This was mainly the result of the United States' military and economic preeminence, although it was widely interpreted as evidence that the world agreed on the basic direction of the international order. That post-Cold War era is now definitively over. Strategic competition has intensified and now touches almost every aspect of international politics, not just the military domain. It is complicating the global economy. It is changing how countries deal with shared problems such as climate change and pandemics. And it is posing fundamental questions about what comes next. Old assumptions and structures must be adapted to meet the challenges the United States will face between now and 2050. In the previous era, there was reluctance to tackle clear market failures that threatened the resilience of the U.S. economy. Since the U.S. military had no peer, and as a response to 9/11, Washington focused on non-state actors and rogue nations. It did not focus on improving its strategic position and preparing for a new era in which competitors would seek to replicate its military advantages, since that was not the world it faced at the time. Officials also largely assumed that the world would coalesce to tackle common crises, as it did in 2008 with the financial crisis, rather than fragment, as it would do in the face of a once-in-a-century pandemic. Washington too often treated international institutions as set in stone without addressing the ways in which they were exclusive and did not represent the broader international community. The overall effect was that although the United States remained the world's preeminent power, some of its most vital muscles atrophied. On top of this, with the election of Donald Trump, the United States had a president who believed that its alliances were a form of geopolitical welfare. The steps he took that damaged those alliances were celebrated by Beijing and Moscow, which correctly saw U.S. alliances as a source of American strength rather than as a liability. Instead of acting to shape the international order, Trump pulled back from it. This is what President Biden was faced with when he took office. He was determined not just to repair the immediate damage to the United States alliances and its leadership of the free world, but also to pursue the long-term project of modernizing U.S. foreign policy for the challenges of today. This task was brought into stark relief by Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, as well as by China's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea and across the Taiwan Strait. The essence of President Biden's foreign policy is to lay a new foundation of American strength so that the country is best positioned to shape the new era in a way that protects its interests and values and advances the common good. The country's future will be determined by two things: whether it can sustain its core advantages in geopolitical competition and whether it can rally the world to address transnational challenges from climate change and global health to food security and inclusive economic growth. At a fundamental level, this requires changing the way the United States thinks about power. This administration came to office believing that international power depends on a strong domestic economy and that the strength of the economy is measured not just by its size or efficiency but also by the degree to which it works for all Americans and is free of dangerous dependencies. We understood that American power also rests on its alliances, but that these relationships, many of which date back more than 7 decades, had to be updated and energized for the challenges of today. We realized that the United States is stronger when its partners are, too, and so we are committed to delivering a better value proposition globally to help countries solve pressing problems that no one country can solve on its own. And we recognized that Washington could no longer afford an undisciplined approach to the use of military force, even as we have mobilized a massive effort to defend Ukraine and stop Russian aggression. The Biden administration understands the new realities of power. And that is why we will leave America stronger than we found it. Title I: The Home Front. After the Cold War, the United States underweight the importance of investing in economic vibrancy at home. In the decades following World War II, the country had pursued a policy of bold public investment, including in R&D and in strategic sectors. That strategy underpinned its economic success, but over time, the United States moved away from it. The U.S. government designed trade policies and a tax code that placed insufficient focus on both American workers and the planet. In the exuberance at the end of history, many observers asserted that geopolitical rivalries would give way to economic integration, and most believed that new countries brought into the international economic system would adjust their policies to play by the rules. As a result, the U.S. economy developed worrying vulnerabilities. While at an aggregate level it thrived, under the surface, whole communities were hollowed out. The United States ceded the lead in critical manufacturing sectors. It failed to make the necessary investments in its infrastructure. And the middle class took a hit. President Biden has prioritized investing in innovation and industrial strength at home, what has become known as Bidenomics. These public investments are not about picking winners and losers or bringing globalization to an end. they enable rather than replace private investment. And they enhance the United States' capacity to deliver inclusive growth, build resilience, and protect national security. The Biden administration has enacted the most far-reaching new investments in decades, including the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. We are promoting new breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, clean energy, and semiconductors while protecting the United States' advantages and security through new export controls and investment rules, in partnership with allies. These policies have made a difference. Large-scale investments in semiconductor and clean energy production are up 20-fold since 2019. We now estimate that public and private investment in these sectors will total $3.5 trillion over the next decade. And construction spending on manufacturing has doubled since the end of 2021. In recent decades, the United States supply chains for critical minerals have become heavily dependent on unpredictable overseas markets, many of which are dominated by China. This is why the administration is working to build resilient, durable supply chains with partners and allies in vital sectors, including semiconductors, medicine and biotechnology, critical minerals, and batteries, so that the United States is not vulnerable to price or supply disruptions. Our approach encompasses minerals that are important to all aspects of national security, understanding that the communications, energy, and computing sectors are as essential as the traditional defense sector. All this has put the United States in a position to better absorb attempts by external powers to limit American access to critical inputs. When this administration took office, we found that although the U.S. military is the strongest in the world, its industrial base suffered from a series of unaddressed vulnerabilities. After years of underinvestment, an aging workforce, and supply chain disruptions, important defense sectors had become weaker and less dynamic. The Biden administration is rebuilding those sectors, doing everything from investing in the submarine industrial base to producing more critical munitions so that the United States can make what is necessary to sustain deterrence in competitive regions. We are investing in the U.S. nuclear deterrent to ensure its continued effectiveness as competitors build up their arsenals while signaling openness to future arms control negotiations if competitors are interested. We are also partnering with the most innovative labs and companies to ensure that the United States' superior conventional capabilities take advantage of the latest technologies. Future administrations may differ from ours on the details of how to harness the domestic sources of national strength. That is a legitimate topic for debate. But in a more competitive world, there can be no doubt that Washington needs to break down the barrier between domestic and foreign policy and that major public investments are an essential component of foreign policy. President Dwight Eisenhower did this in the 1950s. We are doing it again today, but in partnership with the private sector, in coordination with allies, and with a focus on today's cutting-edge technologies. Title II, All Together Now. The United States' alliances and partnerships with other democracies have been its greatest international advantage. They helped create a freer and more stable world. They helped deter aggression or reverse it. And they meant that Washington never had to go it alone. But these alliances were built for a different era. In recent years, the United States was underutilizing or even undermining them. President Biden was clear from the moment he took office about the importance he attached to U.S. alliances, especially given his predecessor's skepticism of them. But he understood that even those who supported these alliances over the past 3 decades often overlooked the need to modernize them for competition in an age of interdependence. Accordingly, we have strengthened these alliances and partnerships in material ways that improve the United States' strategic position and its ability to deal with shared challenges. For example, we have mobilized a global coalition of countries to support Ukraine as it defends itself against an unprovoked war of aggression and to impose costs on Russia. NATO has expanded to include Finland, soon to be followed by Sweden, 2 historically non-aligned nations. NATO has also adjusted its posture on its eastern flank, deployed a capability to respond to cyber attacks against its members, and invested in its air and missile defenses. And the United States and the EU have dramatically deepened cooperation on economics, energy, technology, and national security. We are doing something similar in Asia. In August, we held a historic summit at Camp David that cemented a new era of trilateral cooperation among the United States, Japan, and South Korea while bringing the United States' bilateral alliances with those countries to new heights. In the face of North Korea's dangerous and illicit nuclear and missile programs, we are working to ensure that the United States' extended deterrence is stronger than ever so that the region remains peaceful and stable. That is why we concluded the Washington Declaration with South Korea and why we're advancing extended trilateral deterrence discussions with Japan as well. Through AUKUS, the trilateral security partnership among the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom, we have integrated the three countries' defense industrial bases to produce conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarines and increase cooperation on advanced capabilities such as artificial intelligence, autonomous platforms, and electronic warfare. Access to new sites through a defense cooperation agreement with the Philippines strengthens the United States' strategic posture in the Indo-Pacific. In September, President Biden traveled to Hanoi to announce that the United States and Vietnam were elevating their relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The Quad, which brings together the United States, Australia, India, and Japan, has unleashed new forms of regional cooperation on technology, climate, health, and maritime security. We are also investing in a 21st-century partnership between the United States and India, for example, with the U.S.-India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology. And through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, we are deepening trade relationships and negotiating first-of-their-kind agreements on supply chain resilience, the clean energy economy, and anti-corruption and tax cooperation with 13 diverse partners in the region. The administration is strengthening U.S. partnerships outside Asia and across traditional regional seams. Last December, at the first U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit since 2014, the United States made a series of historic commitments, including supporting the African Union's membership in the G20 and signing a Memorandum of Understanding with the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, an effort that would create a combined continent-wide market of 1.3 billion people and $3.4 trillion. Earlier in 2022, we galvanized hemispheric action on migration through the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection and launched the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, an initiative to drive the Western Hemisphere's economic recovery. We also stood up a new coalition with India, Israel, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates, known as I2U2. It brings together South Asia, the Middle East, and the United States through joint initiatives on water, energy, transportation, space, health, and food security. This September, the United States joined with 31 other countries across North America, South America, Africa, and Europe to create the Partnership for Atlantic Cooperation to invest in science and technology, promote the sustainable use of the ocean, and stop climate change. We have formed a new global cyber partnership, bringing together 47 countries and international organizations to counter the scourge of ransomware. These are not isolated efforts. They are part of a self-reinforcing latticework of cooperation. The United States' closest partners are fellow democracies, and we will work vigorously to defend democracy across the globe. The Summit for Democracy, which the President first convened in 2021, has created an institutional basis for deepening democracy and advancing governance, anti-corruption, and human rights and getting fellow democracies to own the agenda alongside Washington. But the range of countries supporting Washington's vision of a free, open, prosperous, and secure world is broad and powerful, and it includes those with diverse political systems. We will work with any country prepared to stand up for the principles of the UN Charter even as we shore up transparent and accountable governance and support democratic reformers and human rights defenders. We are also growing the connective tissue between U.S. alliances in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe. The United States is stronger in each region because of its alliances in the other. Allies in the Indo-Pacific are staunch supporters of Ukraine, while allies in Europe are helping the United States support peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The President's efforts to strengthen alliances are also contributing to the greatest amount of burden sharing in decades. The United States is asking its allies to step up while also offering more itself. Roughly 20 NATO countries are on track to meet the target of spending 2% of their GDPs on defense in 2024. Up from just 7 countries in 2022. Japan has promised to double its defense budget and is purchasing U.S.-made Tomahawk missiles, which will enhance its deterrence of nuclear-armed competitors in the region. As part of AUKUS, Australia is making the biggest single investment in defense capability in its history while also investing in the U.S. defense industrial base. Germany has become the third largest supplier of weapons to Ukraine and is weaning itself off Russian energy. Title 3, A Better Deal. The first year of the COVID-19 pandemic showed that if the United States is unwilling to lead efforts to solve global problems, no one else will step into the breach. In 2020, many world leaders were barely on speaking terms. The G7 struggled to coalesce when COVID-19 struck. Instead of coordinating closely, countries undertook disparate efforts that made the pandemic more severe than it might otherwise have been. President Biden and his team have always believed that the United States has a crucial role to play in spurring international cooperation, whether on the global economy, health, development, or the environment. But the shocking experience of a global crisis without global leadership seared this into the president's worldview. As we looked at the daunting array of global challenges, we realized that we would not just have to restore U.S. leadership, we would also need to up our game and offer the world, especially the global south, a better value proposition. Much of the world is not preoccupied with geopolitical contests. Most countries want to know that they have partners that can help them address the problems they confront, some of which feel existential. For these countries, the complaint is not that there is too much America but too little. Yes, they say, we see the pitfalls of getting closer to major authoritarian powers, but where is your alternative? President Biden understands this. Where the United States was absent, it is now competitive. Where it was competitive, it is now leading with urgency and purpose. And it is doing that in partnership with other countries, figuring out how to solve pressing problems together. The United States has maintained its long-standing leadership on global development, sustained its vital investments in health and food security, and remained the leading provider of humanitarian assistance and emergency food aid at a time of unprecedented global need. President Biden is now leading a global effort to raise ambitions even higher. The United States is placing priority on driving progress toward the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. It is scaling up multilateral development banks, mobilizing the private sector, and helping countries unlock domestic capital. As a cornerstone of this effort, the administration is modernizing the World Bank so it can address today's challenges with sufficient speed and scale, and we are working with partners to significantly increase the bank's financing, including to low- and middle-income countries. We are also pressing for solutions to help vulnerable countries quickly and transparently address unsustainable debt, freeing up resources for them to invest in their futures rather than make back-breaking debt payments. In recent years, China's Belt and Road Initiative was dominant, and the United States lagged behind in large-scale infrastructure investment in developing countries. Now, the United States is mobilizing hundreds of billions of dollars in capital through the G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment to support physical, digital, clean energy, and health infrastructure across developing countries. The United States has led the way on global health. It is investing more than ever to end epidemics such as HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria as public health threats by 2030. It donated almost 700 million COVID-19 vaccine doses to more than 115 countries and nearly half of all global pandemic response funds, and it remains vigilant about emerging threats. It is helping 50 countries prepare, prevent, and respond to the next health emergency. Most people likely have not heard about the recent outbreaks of Marburg virus disease or Ebola, because we learned the lessons of the 2014 West African Ebola epidemic and responded before outbreaks in East, Central, and West Africa went global. No country can offer a credible value proposition to the world if it is not serious about climate change. The Biden administration inherited a massive gap between ambition and reality when it comes to carbon mitigation. The United States is now driving the global deployment of clean energy technology at scale. For the first time, the country will meet its national commitment under the Paris Agreement to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions and the global commitment to mobilize $100 billion a year for developing countries to deal with climate change. It has launched joint initiatives such as the Just Energy Transition Partnership with Indonesia, which will accelerate that country's power sector transition with support from public and private sources. New fit-for-purpose partnerships are not meant to replace existing international institutions. The Biden administration is working to reinforce and reinvigorate those institutions, updating them for the world we face today. In addition to modernizing the World Bank, the president has also proposed giving developing countries a greater say at the International Monetary Fund. The administration will continue to try to reform the World Trade Organization so it can drive the clean energy transition, protect workers, and promote inclusive and sustainable growth while continuing to uphold competition, openness, transparency, and the rule of law. The president has called for far-reaching reforms to the UN Security Council to expand the number of members, both permanent and non-permanent, and make it more effective and representative. The president also knows that countries need to be able to cooperate on challenges that were unfathomable not that long ago. That need is particularly urgent with respect to artificial intelligence. This is why we brought together the leading U.S. businesses responsible for AI innovation to make a series of voluntary commitments to develop AI in ways that are safe, secure, and transparent. It is why the U.S. government itself has made commitments to this end, issuing in February a declaration on the responsible military use of AI. And it is why we are building on these initiatives by working with U.S. allies, partners, and other countries to develop strong rules and principles to govern AI. Delivering a better value proposition is a work in progress, but it is a vital pillar of a new foundation of American strength. Not only is it the right thing to do, it also serves U.S. interests. Helping other countries get stronger makes America stronger and more secure. It creates new partners and better friends. We will continue to build America's affirmative offering to the world. It is absolutely necessary if the United States is to win the competition to shape the future of the international order so that it is free, open, prosperous, and secure. Title IV, Pick Your Battles. In the 1990s, U.S. defense policy was dominated by questions about whether and how to intervene in war-torn countries to prevent mass atrocities. After September 11th, the United States shifted its focus to terrorist groups. The risk of great power conflict appeared remote. That began to change with Russia's invasions of Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014, as well as with China's breakneck military modernization and its growing military provocations in the East China and South China Seas and the Taiwan Strait. But America's priorities had not adapted fast enough to the challenges of deterring great power aggression and responding once it occurred. President Biden was determined to adapt. He ended U.S. involvement in the war in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history, and freed the United States from sustaining military forces in active hostilities for the first time in 2 decades. This transition was unquestionably painful, especially for the people of Afghanistan and for the U.S. troops and other personnel who served there. But it was necessary for preparing the U.S. military for the challenges ahead. One of those challenges came even more quickly than we had anticipated, with Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022. If the United States were still fighting in Afghanistan, it is highly likely that Russia would be doing everything it could right now to help the Taliban pin Washington down there, preventing it from focusing its attention on helping Ukraine. Even as our priorities shift away from major military interventions, we remain ready to deal with the enduring threat of international terrorism. We have acted over the horizon in Afghanistan, most notably with the operation that killed the head of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and we have taken other terrorist targets off the battlefield in Somalia, Syria, and elsewhere. We will continue to do so. But we will also avoid the protracted forever wars that can tie down U.S. forces and that do little to actually reduce the threats to the United States. With respect to the Middle East more generally, the president inherited a region that was highly pressurized. The original version of this article, written before the October 7 terrorist attacks by Hamas in Israel, emphasized the progress in the Middle East after 2 decades marked by a massive U.S. military intervention in Iraq, a NATO military campaign in Libya, raging civil wars, refugee crises, the rise of a self-declared terrorist caliphate, revolutions and counter-revolutions, and the breakdown in relations among key countries in the region. It described our efforts to return to a disciplined U.S. policy approach that prioritized deterring aggression, de-escalating conflicts, and integrating the region through joint infrastructure projects, including between Israel and its Arab neighbors. There was material progress. The war in Yemen had reached its 18th month of a truce. Other conflicts had cooled. Regional leaders openly worked together. In September, the president announced a new economic corridor that connects India to Europe through the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. The original version of this article emphasized that this progress was fragile and that perennial challenges remained, including tensions between Israel and Palestinians and the threat posed by Iran. The October 7th attacks have cast a shadow over the entire regional picture, the repercussions of which are still playing out, including the risk of significant regional escalation. But the disciplined approach in the Middle East that we have pursued remains core to our posture and planning as we deal with this crisis. As President Biden demonstrated when he traveled to Israel in a rare wartime visit on October 18, the United States firmly supports Israel as it protects its citizens and defends itself against brutal terrorists. We are working closely with regional partners to facilitate the sustainable delivery of humanitarian assistance to civilians in the Gaza Strip. And the President has repeatedly made clear that the United States stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict and respect for the laws of war. Hamas, which has committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, does not represent the Palestinian people, and it does not stand for their right to dignity and self-determination. We are committed to a two-state solution that does. In fact, our discussions with Saudi Arabia and Israel toward normalization have always included significant proposals for the Palestinians. If agreed, this component would ensure that a path to two states remains viable, with significant and concrete steps taken in that direction by all relevant parties. We are alert to the risk that the current crisis could spiral into a regional conflict. We have conducted extensive diplomatic outreach and enhanced our military force posture in the region. Since the beginning of this administration, we have acted militarily when necessary to protect U.S. personnel. We are committed to ensuring that Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. And while military force must never be a tool of first resort, we stand ready and prepared to use it when necessary to protect U.S. personnel and interests in this important region. The crisis in the Middle East does not change the fact that the United States needs to prepare for a new era of strategic competition, in particular by deterring and responding to great power aggression. When we found out that Russian President Vladimir Putin was preparing to invade Ukraine, we were confronted with a challenge. The United States was not committed by treaty to Ukraine's defense, but if Russia's aggression went unanswered, a sovereign state would be extinguished, and a message would be sent to autocrats around the world that might makes right. We sought to avert the crisis by making it clear to Russia that the United States would respond by supporting Ukraine and by displaying a willingness to engage in talks on European security, even though Russia was not serious about doing so. We also used the deliberate and authorized public release of intelligence to warn Ukraine, rally U.S. partners, and deprive Russia of the ability to create false pretexts for its invasion. When Putin invaded, we implemented a policy to help Ukraine defend itself without sending U.S. troops to war. The United States dispatched massive quantities of defensive weapons to the Ukrainians and rallied allies and partners to do the same. It coordinated the immense logistical undertaking to deliver those capabilities to the battlefield. This assistance has been divided into 47 different packages of military assistance to date, which were structured to respond to Ukraine's needs as they evolved over the course of the conflict. We cooperated closely with the Ukrainian government on its requirements and worked through technical and logistical details to make sure its forces had what they needed. We also increased U.S. intelligence cooperation with Ukraine, as well as training efforts. And we imposed far-reaching sanctions on Russia to reduce its ability to wage war. President Biden also made it abundantly clear that if Russia attacked a NATO ally, the United States would defend every inch of Allied territory, backing that up with new force deployments. We started a process with U.S. allies and partners to help Ukraine build a military that could defend itself on land, at sea, and in the air and deter future aggression. Our approach in Ukraine is sustainable, and, contrary to those who say otherwise, it enhances the United States' capacity to meet every contingency in the Indo-Pacific. The American people know a bully when they see one. They understand that if they were to pull U.S. support from Ukraine, it would not just put Ukrainians at a severe disadvantage as they defend themselves, but also set a terrible precedent, encouraging aggression in Europe and beyond. American support for Ukraine is broad and deep, and it will endure. Title V, the competition to come. It is clear that the world is becoming more competitive, that technology will be a disruptive force, and that shared problems will become more acute over time. But it is not clear precisely how these forces will manifest themselves. The United States has been surprised in the past, with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 and Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and it will likely be surprised in the future, no matter how hard the government works to anticipate what is coming, and U.S. intelligence agencies have gotten a lot right, including accurately warning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Our strategy is designed to work in a wide variety of scenarios. By investing in the sources of domestic strength, deepening alliances and partnerships, delivering results on global challenges, and staying disciplined in the exercise of power, the United States will be prepared to advance its vision of a free, open, prosperous, and secure world no matter what surprises are in store. We have created, in Secretary of State Dean Acheson's words, situations of strength.
The coming era of competition will be unlike anything experienced before.
European security competition in the 19th and early 20th centuries was largely a regional contest between mid-size and proximate powers that ultimately ended in calamity. The Cold War that followed the most destructive war in human history was waged between two superpowers that had very low levels of interdependence. That ended decisively and in America's favor. Today's competition is fundamentally different. The United States and China are economically interdependent. The contest is truly global, but not zero-sum. The shared challenges the two sides face are unprecedented. We are often asked about the end state of U.S. competition with China. We expect China to remain a major player on the world stage for the foreseeable future. We seek a free, open, prosperous, and secure international order, one that protects the interests of the United States and its friends and delivers global public goods. But we do not expect a transformative end state like the one that resulted from the collapse of the Soviet Union. There will be an ebb and flow to the competition. The United States will make gains, but China will, too. Washington must balance a sense of urgency with patience, understanding that what matters is the sum of its actions, not winning a single news cycle. And we need a sustained sense of confidence in our capacity to outcompete any country. The past 2.5 years have upended assumptions on the relative trajectories of the United States and China. The United States continues to enjoy a substantial trade and investment relationship with China. But the economic relationship with China is complicated because the country is a competitor. We will make no apology in pushing back on unfair trade practices that harm American workers. And we are concerned that China can take advantage of America's openness to use U.S. technologies against the United States and its allies. Against this backdrop, we seek to de-risk and diversify, not decouple. We want to protect a targeted number of sensitive technologies with focused restrictions, creating what some have called a small yard and a high fence. We have faced criticism from various quarters that these steps are mercantilist or protectionist. This is untrue. These are steps taken in partnership with others and focused on a narrow set of technologies, steps that the United States needs to take in a more contested world to protect its national security while supporting an interconnected global economy. At the same time, we are deepening technological cooperation with like-minded partners and allies, including with India and through the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, a forum created in 2021. We will keep investing in the United States' own capacities and in secure, resilient supply chains. And we will keep advancing an agenda that promotes workers' rights in pursuit of decent, safe, and healthy work at home and abroad to create a level playing field for American workers and companies. At times, the competition will be intense. We are prepared for that. We are pushing back hard on aggression, coercion, and intimidation and standing up for the basic rules of the road, such as freedom of navigation in the sea. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken put it in a speech in September, America's enlightened self-interest in preserving and strengthening this order has never been greater. We also understand that the United States competitors, particularly China, have a fundamentally different vision. But Washington and Beijing need to figure out how to manage competition to reduce tensions and find a way forward on shared challenges. That is why the Biden administration is intensifying U.S. diplomacy with China, preserving existing channels of communication and creating new ones. Americans have internalized some of the lessons of the crises of decades past, especially the potential to stumble into conflict.
High-level and repeated interaction is crucial to clear up misperception, avoid miscommunication, send unambiguous signals, and arrest downward spirals that could erupt into a major crisis.
Unfortunately, Beijing has often appeared to have drawn different lessons about managing tensions, concluding that guardrails can fuel competition in the same way that seatbelts encourage reckless driving. It is a mistaken belief. Just as the use of seatbelts cuts traffic fatalities in half, so do communication and basic safety measures reduce the risk of geopolitical accidents. Recently, however, there have been encouraging signs that Beijing may recognize the value of stabilization. The real test will be if the channels can endure when tensions inevitably spike. We should also remember that not everything competitors do is incompatible with U.S. interests. The deal that China brokered this year between Iran and Saudi Arabia partially reduced tensions between those two countries, a development that the United States also wants to see. Washington could not have tried to broker that deal, given the lack of U.S. diplomatic relations with Iran, and it should not try to undermine it. To take another example, the United States and China are engaged in a rapid and high-stakes technological competition, but the two sides need to be able to work together on the risks that arise from artificial intelligence. Doing so is not a sign of going wobbly. It reflects a clear-eyed assessment that AI could pose unique challenges to humanity and that great powers have a collective responsibility to deal with them. It is only natural that countries aligned with neither the United States nor China will engage with both, seeking to benefit from the competition while endeavoring to protect their own interests from any spillover effects. Many of these countries see themselves as part of the Global South, a grouping that has a logic of its own and a distinct critique of the West that dates back to the Cold War and the founding of the non-aligned movement. Unlike during the Cold War, however, the United States will avoid the temptation to see the world solely through the prism of geopolitical competition or treat these countries as places for proxy contests. It will instead continue to engage with them on their own terms. Washington should be realistic about its expectations when dealing with these countries, respecting their sovereignty and their right to make decisions that advance their own interests. But it also needs to be clear about what is most important to the United States. That is how we will seek to shape relations with them, so that on balance they have incentives to act in ways consistent with U.S. interests. In the decade ahead, U.S. officials will spend more time than they did the past 30 years talking with countries that they disagree with, often on fundamental issues. The world is becoming more contested, and the United States cannot talk only with those who share its vision or values. We will keep working to shape the overall diplomatic landscape in ways that advance both U.S. and shared interests. For instance, when China, Brazil, and a group of 7 African countries announced that they would pursue peace efforts to end Russia's war in Ukraine, we did not reject these initiatives on principle. We called on these countries to talk with Ukrainian officials and offer assurances that their proposals for a settlement would be consistent with the UN Charter. Some of the seeds we are planting now, investments in advanced technology, for instance, or the AUKUS submarines, will take many years to bear fruit. But there are also some issues on which we can and will act now, what we call our unfinished business. We have to ensure a Ukraine that is sovereign, democratic, and free. We have to strengthen peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. We have to advance regional integration in the Middle East while continuing to check Iran. We have to modernize the United States military and defense industrial base. And we have to deliver on infrastructure, development, and climate commitments to the Global South. Title VI, Up to U.S. The United States has reached the third phase of the global role it assumed following World War II. In the first phase, the Truman administration laid the foundation of American power to accomplish 2 objectives: strengthening democracies and democratic cooperation and containing the Soviet Union. This strategy, carried on by subsequent presidents, included a comprehensive effort to invest in American industry, especially in new technologies, from the 1950s to the 1970s. This commitment to national strength through industrial investment began to erode in the 1980s, and there was little perceived need for it after the Cold War. In the second phase, with the United States having no peer competitor, successive administrations sought to enlarge the U.S.-led rules-based order and establish patterns of cooperation on critical issues. This era transformed the world for the better in a variety of ways. Many countries became more free, prosperous, and secure, global poverty was slashed, and the world responded effectively to the 2008 financial crisis, but it was also a period of geopolitical change. The United States now finds itself at the start of the third era, one in which it is adjusting for a new period of competition in an age of interdependence and transnational challenges. This does not mean breaking with the past or giving up the gains that have been made, but it does mean laying a new foundation of American strength.
That requires revisiting long-held assumptions if we are to leave America stronger than we found it and better prepared for what lies ahead. The outcome of this phase will not be determined solely by outside forces. It will also, to a large extent, be decided by the United States' own choices.